It was a cold morning when the police showed up at my door. I still remember the way my heart stopped for a moment, the fear, the confusion, the disbelief. My son, my only son, was accused of a crime he didn't commit. A crime so serious it could ruin his entire life, tear apart our family, and shatter all our dreams. They said he was involved in a robbery, a violent one. But I knew my son. I knew his heart. He was kind, gentle, and never even raised his voice to anyone. How could they say this about him? The news spread fast. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors. Friends stopped calling. The weight of the accusation was unbearable, but what hurt the most was seeing my son taken away in handcuffs, confused and terrified. I had to fight. Not just for his freedom, but for his dignity. For the truth to be heard. I hired the best lawyer I could find, but even then, the system felt stacked against us. Evidence was circumstantial, witnesses unreliable, yet the pressure to confess was constant. My son, so young and scared, almost gave in to despair. But I promised him I would never stop believing in him. Every day, I prayed for justice. Every night, I stayed awake, planning our next move. This fight wasn't just mine. It became a battle for every mother whose child was wrongly accused. For every family broken by a mistake. And through it all, I discovered strength I didn't know I had, a fierce love that refused to be silenced, a hope that no prison could cage. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The courtroom became our second home, a place of cold walls, harsh lights, and whispered judgments. Each hearing tore at my soul, but I couldn't afford to break down. Not in front of him. Not in front of the world. I had to be his rock, his shield, his voice when his own was shaking with fear. The media caught wind of the case quickly. Headlines painted my son as a criminal, and public opinion swayed like a cruel tide against us. I remember reading one article calling him a dangerous youth. That label felt like a slap in the face, a lie shouted so loud it almost drowned out my pleas for truth. But what hurt most wasn't the accusations. It was the silence from those who once called themselves friends. The visits stopped. Phone calls dried up. Even my family was divided, some doubted his innocence, others didn't know what to believe. We were isolated, battling not just the law but loneliness itself. Yet, in the darkest moments, small miracles happened. A neighbor who stood by us when no one else would. A teacher who vouched for my son's character. Letters from strangers who believed in justice and sent words of encouragement. These flickers of hope fueled me, reminding me that we weren't completely alone in this fight. And then came the turning point. A witness, a young woman, stepped forward quietly, her voice trembling but determined. She had seen the real culprit that night. Her testimony cracked the prosecution's case, shaking the foundations of their story. It was like the sun piercing through thick storm clouds after a relentless night. That day, I saw the first genuine smile on my son's face in months. The hope that had been buried under layers of fear and despair began to bloom again. We weren't free yet, but for the first time, the scales of justice felt balanced. After the witness came forward, the case began to shift. The prosecution scrambled to hold on to their story, but cracks appeared everywhere. The more we fought, the clearer it became that the truth was on our side. Yet, the fight wasn't over. Courtrooms are battlegrounds where justice can take years to unfold, and every day was a test of patience and strength. My son, though weary, found a new fire inside him. He started to believe again, in himself, in me, and in the possibility of freedom. We talked long into the nights about the future, about the life waiting beyond those prison walls. It was those conversations that kept us going when despair tried to drag us under. But even with hope, there were moments of crushing pain. Watching him wear a prison uniform, hearing the heavy clank of the cell door closing behind him, these were things no mother should endure. I felt helpless, sometimes broken, but I refused to give up. This was our story, and I would make sure it had the ending it deserved. Friends returned slowly, some ashamed for having doubted us. The community started to see the real person behind the headlines. Small acts of kindness, gestures of support, they all added up, reminding us that truth and love have a way of shining through even the darkest clouds. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling hearing, my son told me something I'll never forget. "Mom," he said, his voice steady but soft, "no matter what happens, thank you for believing in me. You gave me the strength to keep fighting." Those words were everything. They were the light that kept my heart beating through every long night. We knew the road ahead was uncertain, but we had reclaimed our hope. And sometimes, hope is all you need to keep moving forward. The trial stretched on for months, each day heavier than the last. The courtroom was filled with tense faces, whispered rumors, and the relentless ticking of the clock counting down to the verdict that would change our lives forever. I watched my son sit there, his hands clenched tightly, eyes fixed on a future that seemed so uncertain. Evidence that once seemed damning was slowly unraveling under the scrutiny of the defense. The witnesses' testimony gained strength, and the prosecution's story began to fall apart. But even as the truth emerged, the weight of years lost and pain endured hung heavily over us. Outside the courtroom, our lives had changed in ways I never expected. I found strength in the support of a few close friends who stood by me when most turned away. Together, we held on to the belief that justice would prevail even when the world seemed ready to write us off. One afternoon, as I waited for the judge's final ruling, a quiet calm settled over me. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer. Not for the outcome, but for strength, for peace, for the chance to rebuild what had been broken. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom held its breath. The judge's voice echoed, clear and unwavering, "Not guilty." Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of victory, of justice restored, and of a family reunited. My son was free. Our fight had been long and painful, but it had not been in vain. We had faced the darkest storm together and emerged stronger. That day marked not just the end of a trial, but the beginning of healing. After the verdict, life didn't magically return to what it was before. Freedom was bittersweet. There were scars that no court ruling could erase, the lost time, the broken trust, the wounds that needed tending. But we faced them together, slowly rebuilding what had been torn apart. My son struggled to find his place in a world that had judged him so harshly. Jobs were hard to come by, and old whispers still followed him. But I saw his resilience, a quiet strength born from the fire of our ordeal. And I was proud beyond words. We started small, celebrating every victory, a smile, a new friendship, a job interview. Each step forward was a testament to the power of hope and love. I learned that justice isn't just about the courtroom, it's about healing the soul. Our story became one I shared with others, mothers, fathers, families caught in the crossfire of injustice. I wanted them to know they weren't alone. That even in the darkest hours, there is light. There is a way through. Sometimes, I still sit by the window, thinking about all we've been through. And I thank the stars for the courage to fight, the kindness of strangers, and the bond that kept us unbroken. Because in the end, love is the strongest truth of all. Asterisk freedom came with its own battles. The courtroom doors had closed behind us, but the world outside was far from forgiving. My son carried invisible chains, the stigma of being labeled, the weight of suspicion that refused to lift. Job applications returned unanswered, old friends avoided him on the street, and whispers followed us like shadows. It was a daily fight, not just to rebuild a life, but to reclaim dignity. I watched him wrestle with his past, his anger. And the question that haunted us both, will they ever truly believe he's innocent? Yet, in those moments of doubt, I saw his spirit, bruised but unbroken, fighting back with a fierce determination I could only admire. Our family circle shrank and grew all at once. Some relatives turned away, uncomfortable with the truth. Others stepped in, offering support that felt like lifelines. I found strength in their kindness and in the resilience of my son, whose quiet courage inspired me every day. We sought therapy together, learning to heal wounds deeper than any courtroom battle. I shared stories of our fight, hoping to give voice to those silenced by injustice. Our home, once shadowed by fear and uncertainty, slowly filled with laughter. Again, fragile but real. One afternoon, I found my son sitting on the porch, staring at the sky. He looked at me and said, "Mom, I want to help others like me. To be a voice for those who don't have one." His words were a spark, a sign that our pain could become purpose. Together, we started volunteering, speaking out about wrongful accusations, and helping families navigate the legal maze. It was hard work, exhausting but rewarding. The fight for justice had changed us, but it also gave us a mission, to turn our darkest chapter into a beacon of hope. I never imagined that from such a painful journey, we could find meaning and strength. Yet here we were, survivors not just of a broken system, but of despair itself. And as I look back, I know one thing for certain: love, faith, and resilience can overcome even the deepest wounds. Asterisk as time passed, our story began to reach more people than I ever imagined. Letters poured in from mothers, sons, daughters, all fighting their own battles against injustice. It became clear that our pain was shared, and our hope could be contagious. I realized that the fight was bigger than just us. One day, while speaking at a community event, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She told me her son was wrongfully accused and that hearing our story gave her strength to keep going. It was in that moment I understood the power of sharing, how pain transformed into purpose can heal not just one family, but many. But even with this new mission, the memories of those dark days never faded completely. Some nights, I still woke up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, reliving every courtroom moment. The fear never truly left, but neither did the resolve to protect my son and fight for justice for others. Our bond grew stronger through it all. We learned to celebrate the small victories and hold each other up through the setbacks. I saw my son not just as a survivor, but as a man who refused to be defined by the worst moment of his life. And then came the day when everything changed again. An unexpected letter arrived in the mail, from someone who had watched our journey quietly from the shadows. It contained information, proof, that could finally expose the real culprit and clear my son's name forever. Holding that letter, I felt a surge of emotions: relief, fear, hope, and an overwhelming sense of justice finally within reach. Our fight was far from over, but for the first time, the end felt possible. And together, we would see it through. Asterisk the day we went to the authorities with the new evidence was like stepping into the light after decades in darkness. Every step felt heavy but purposeful. The weight of years lost in battles fought pushed us forward, but there was also a new strength, the strength of truth finally breaking free. The investigation reopened, and the real culprit was brought to justice. My son's name was cleared once and for all. The relief was indescribable, not just for him, but for me, for our family, and for everyone who had stood by us. We sat together after the verdict, holding hands and letting the silence speak what words couldn't. The scars remained, but so did the unbreakable bond forged in fire. We were no longer victims but survivors, champions of hope and resilience. Looking back, I know our story is one of pain, but also of courage, love, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. It's a story I share so others may find strength when faced with their own darkest trials. Because in the end, no matter how long the night, the dawn always comes. And with it, a chance to heal, to forgive, and to begin again.